Good afternoon, everyone. Ivan here. Great to see everyone on this Monday afternoon now. Why don't you just go ahead and take a minute and let me know where you're watching from as we give everyone an opportunity to go ahead and get logged on and get started here. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you exactly how I conduct or schedule out and conduct my interior rehabs in a very rapid and cost-effective manner. I'll be walking you through my entire framework and process that I use to make sure that we find the most cost-effective way to minimize our vacancy loss, minimize our expense, while maximizing our output. And using this rehab process, I've been able to turn minimum 15 units per month while saving 10 to 15% on costs, as well as being ahead of schedule overall according to my business plan. So again, I just want to give everyone an opportunity to get logged on. If you're there in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, just go ahead and drop in the chat where you are calling in from or listening in from. I like to see who is logging on here, and we will get started. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up some slides and start the discussion. Okay, today we're going to be talking about how to deliver interior units on time and on budget. And with this, I developed my 5-step roadmap. Talked about it in the post, how it's so important to have a framework and roadmap. Ensure that you minimize vacancy loss, maximize number of units you can produce in a single month. The 5 steps here are, we first start with the end goal. We want to know exactly what our target is. We always start with the target and then work backwards. Then identify the roadblocks, anything that will prevent us from being able to execute our end goal. Once we understand those roadblocks, then we can put in some strategic planning measures to make sure we're able to mitigate those roadblocks as well as hit our end goal targets. Then really, once that is all built, it's really about execution and make sure we execute well. And then finally, we need to track our overall progress and pivot as needed. So what does this roadmap look like if we break it down? Now, again, imagine you're going to rehab. In this example, I have a 176 unit property in Salt Lake City. Imagine you had to rehab roughly 1/3 of those units. What kind of framework am I going to use? Well, I'm going to use this 5-step rapid rehab roadmap. So first and foremost, we're going to start with the end goal. What is that end goal? In apartment investing, our end goal is to create those investor returns, i.e. cash flow. Everything that we do has to drive towards creating cash flow. If it doesn't create cash flow or any type of cash, then there's no need to do it, especially when it comes to rehab. And we have to keep in mind that these are businesses and we are therefore making business decisions. And even though the properties say may not look up to your standards or may not have the same aesthetic appeal that you would normally like to see in real estate, it could still generate and drive the overall returns that you need to create for your investors and for yourself. And this plays more into even the budget. When we create the budget overall, the very, very bottom line of the budget is net cash flow. And if you're not creating net cash flow, then there's no point in infusing any capital into the property. So that is the first and foremost end goal. And that should be the target that everything we build with the rehab plan drives the property towards as we create value overall. And of course, we want to create a clean and functional property. Got to keep it safe for your tenants to be able to live on the property. And last, you want to create community. Community is great overall because I think there's a humane side of this business that we should be focusing on, not only as investors, but just as people who want to make an impact and make a difference at the community level. And also, but from a business standpoint, the more community you can create, the better your retention, and the more likely you're going to draw the demographic, the type of tenants you want to have live in your property. That's going to help you drive that overall return. And once we have that end goal understood, then we have to put in or understand what are these roadblocks that could get in the way of us achieving our end goal target, which is the cash flow. And so what are these roadblocks that we typically see in apartment investing or operational world? We have evictions. People that don't pay their rent on time go to eviction court, eventually get evicted. We have notices to vacate. People who decide not to renew at a property are going to put in their notice to vacate the property, which then could lead to future vacancy loss. There are linked tenants at times who just simply skip out. They leave, they don't come back, and they leave their keys. And a lot of times they don't leave their keys. It's called skips. Then you have vacancy loss. Say we have people or tenants that put in a notice to vacate. The unit doesn't get released before they move out. They move out, and now that unit is sitting on the market and maybe getting rehabbed, but it's not leased yet. You're not collecting on that unit. It is now vacant. Therefore, you're going to incur vacancy loss, which is a roadblock. We have loss to lease. We have the current in-place rent on a unit. We have the market rent, which may be higher than the in-place rent. And you're not realizing that difference there of additional income you could be experiencing, which is creating a loss to lease and exposure, economic loss in your overall collections, which also creates a roadblock. We have bottlenecking with not having enough rent-ready units, which is one of the whole reasons why we have this roadmap, is to make sure you always have units delivered on time in the right clean and functional condition, and so that they're rented according to market rents based upon the condition. And if you don't have rent-ready units, it creates a huge bottleneck issue with you being able to execute your business plan overall. These roadblocks can also be looked at and understood as exposure. Exposure is any economic event or any event that may lead to an economic loss. And we need to be able to understand what this exposure is and minimize it to the max extent possible. So that is, these are the roadblocks that I focus on as I'm building out my rehab plan. Whoops, I did not go live on Instagram. 1 second, guys. I apologize here. There's another step that we need to do in order to go live on Instagram. Hit the live button there. All right, we are live on Instagram as well. Hello, everyone at Instagram. As you get logged on here, just let me know where you're watching from. Sorry, I forgot to hit the live button a few minutes ago, but we're just getting started here talking about the rehab plan that I use, the roadmap framework that I use to rehab interior units. Now that we know the end goal, we know the roadblocks, next is then to create a plan, a strategic plan, and have certain steps within that plan for us to be able to identify what units that we're going to rehab overall. And first and foremost, when you're taking over property, I really want to take a look at and understand the rent roll and understand the lease termination dates on a per month basis within the rent roll. This is a very telling insight as to how you're going to perform your rehab overall and what you expect to see from a response standpoint and how your tenants are going to respond to your rent increases as you start to blend those into the property throughout each month. And so when I look at a rent roll, I like to organize it in terms of when the lease end date is. And then I study that lease end date to try to understand one, like what's the overall average number of years or months that some of these tenants have been living on a property. And two, how many units are actually going to terminate on a per month basis for me to then understand what my potential exposure is going to be in terms of how many units may not renew and need to be released. And then also to determine how many units I can rehab on a per month basis. And so if we wanted to then look at, for example, overall, on average, how many number of months or years a tenant has stayed at a property, you can see at this particular property that we had a lot of tenants that have been staying at this property for a number of years. And so one thing I would take away from this is that as we perform a renewal plan, a rent bump, a lease trade-out plan, properties that have tenants that have been at a property for quite some time are very accustomed to the existing culture, accustomed to the existing property management style and how aggressive the property management company is in creating or how aggressive they are in terms of where they set their rents. Typically, when you see a lot of properties that have tenants that have been living there for a while, you may have a lot of in-place loss to lease. And you can see in some of these numbers here, if I look at loss to lease, which I created a column over here, these tenants have been here for 10, 9, 10, 6 years. And you can see some of the loss to lease numbers, 236, 118, 160, 181. And then you have numbers in the 30s to 50s. And the lesser time frame that they stayed, the lesser the loss to lease is. So the takeaway is typically when you see this may be actually someone who works at the property living on site. When you see tenants that have lived there for a long time, you're going to have typically a larger loss to lease. And to come in and think that you're going to be able to turn the place around within the first 3 months and bring everyone up to market, if you have, say, over $100 loss to lease, my experience has been that is typically not the case. And even though the market is the market and the market sets the rent rates, they may find another market to live in and not agree to pay for that extra rent bump above about $100 some rent bump. Anything $50 to $100 is probably doable overall, depending on the property, but overall, in general, $50 to $100 rent bump on renewal for the first ask may be achievable. But anything above that, I found you're going to create a mass exodus. So you have to be very careful on how aggressive you are on your renewals as they go out, as you build out your rehab plan, as well as how you determine how many units you're going to be able to rehab on a per month basis. But what I see in a lot of underwriting models is that they assume, a lot of times assume you can rehab, say your model is to rehab 2/3 of the property within 2/3 of the units you want to rehab, so you leave another third for the new owner to come in and rehab. You don't want to have access to those 2/3 of those units within the first year. First and foremost is that when you take over property, any units that were signed within that first month or just prior to closing are now set for the next month, next year, and you're not going to be able to reset those rent rates until the following year, or any units just before that as well. And so you don't have access to those, and therefore you're going to have to build your rent bump plan based upon the leases or the renewals that went out for the following months since at the point in which you close. And we don't know exactly what the previous property management company has sent out for renewal requests. And so then that first month, right after taking over, a lot of times there's not as much clarity as you like on who's going to renew and what rent rates. But we do make some assumptions. And what I do is I then look at, on a projected basis, how many leases I have available to rehab on a per month basis. And then I'll make an assumption that I'll be able to renew about 50% of those leases, and then I'll be able to trade out the remaining 50%. And of the remaining 50% to trade out, maybe I won't rehab all of those remaining 50%. I may rehab 50 of the 50%. So if I have 4 remaining units to trade out, I'd bring 2 up to market, and then 2 I would rehab to a premium level and then get additional rent bump on the premium upgrade. But to determine if you're going to do an upgrade or not, I further then want to understand what additional rent bump I can get based upon in-place rents versus premium rents. And so I would do a deeper study, and I would understand on how I would be able to burn off lost lease as is, or achieve an additional rent bump if I upgrade the unit to a premium level. And so then what I do is I look at the loss to lease as is. In this case, it's a little different, is a different rent roll, but for presentation's sake, I'm going to show you some of the thinking behind this analysis. So we look at in-place rents versus market rents based upon a classic unit. In this case, the current rent is $1,238. The market rent is $1,335 in a classic condition. Now, if I was going to bring it up to a premium condition, then I have a pro forma column here, and the rent would come up to $1,575. So what I would do then is determine if it makes sense or not. What I would do is determine if it makes sense to upgrade that unit and bring it up to premium level. If I keep the unit as is, I can potentially burn off about a $97 loss to lease, which allowed me to achieve roughly $1,164 per year. Now, I could make the decision to upgrade that premium unit. And if I do, then potentially the market rent goes up to $1,575. And based upon an in-place rent up to $1,575, that loss to lease then is $337, or I can annualize that, assuming I collect that rent on a 12-month basis, I can achieve another $4,000 in income. But the way I like to look at it is not just based upon the difference on in-place loss lease versus additional income I can earn if I bring up to premium condition. I want to look at it as what is the difference between what my in-place loss to lease is and the additional rent I can earn if I upgrade it to premium level. In this case, that difference is $240. And I use the term true rent bump, meaning I should be leasing this unit at $1,575, but I'm not because I'm behind market. I need to get it caught up. Excuse me, I should be renting at 13. I should be renting at $1,335. I'm not. I'm behind market rent. I should be getting it caught up. Or I could improve the condition and lease it at $1,575. The difference between those two is $240. And then I budget in how much it would cost to bring that existing unit up to market rate on a per unit basis, how much it would cost. In this case, we estimated $8,500. And we look at that is that there is probably about it's about a 34% ROI, return on my investment, on an annualized basis. And now, is it worth it? Is it worth it commensurate with the risk that you're going to induce by performing a large scale rehab? If you're rehabbing 10 to 15 units, there's more risk than if you're rehabbing, say, 2 to 4 units. But if you have a system and process and the right people in place, getting to 15 units is doable, assuming you have access to 15 units. And a lot of times you don't. Because going back to this example, if you look at how many units terminate on a per month basis, now, and you assume a 50% rent bump, renewals, then you actually only have 50% left over, and the maximum amount of units I can get access to on a per month basis would be in April 5.5, August 5.5, 6.5. So you really don't even get access to 15 units unless you decide to non-renew the tenants. Now let's think about that. Is it worth non-renewing the tenants and just going in and rehab in the entire set of units that you have access to on a per month basis? Meaning we're not going to renew these, or these. We're going to just rehab them and then release them. 9 times out of 10, or 99% of the time, the answer is going to be no. One, because first of all, leasing is the slowest in January. You don't want to rehab anything in January. Picks up a little bit in February, a little more in March, but April is kind of 50-50. May get really hot, may not. It's not till May, June, July, August, we start to see the most activity. So why would you take the chance of taking 8 units offline, rehab them, and they may not even be available, or they may not even be available or released in February, may not be until March. And what's the biggest way you can kill any business plan is vacancy loss. If these 8 units you rehab don't get released within that first month, you're done. Your entire rent bump plan is out of the water because you just incurred, on average, say $1,000 per lease, about an $8,000 loss just in that 1 month. If it goes 2 months unrented, that's $16,000 loss. 3 months, and it goes up to $24,000 loss just on those 8 units. And that is a lot of money. And a $240 true rent bump is not enough rent bump for you to make up for that $8,000 you just lost. So it makes no sense. And you have to be pretty darn good on your execution if you're going to try, which we are, but why incur that kind of risk? So that's why I always advocate focus on renewals, focus on retention, focus on in-place, burning off your in-place loss to lease. And anytime your occupancy is above 93%, hit a 93% in-place occupancy with minimizing loss to lease. And whatever units are available to rehab above that, typically it makes sense to rehab those units where you're getting the max return on your investment. You're getting the max return on available rent bump by renting to the premium level, if it makes sense to do so, while you're minimizing your vacancy loss. That is a lot better rehab plan to go about overall. So there's a lot there that I just kind of unpacked. And I have Academy where I work with my students. We focus on this and very in depth. We walk out these processes and these procedures in a lot more in depth than I have time to do so here. But I do want to share with you that we have to be thinking about the expected exposure if we take a lot of units offline and we get them exposed to vacancy loss. And let me tell you, I made this mistake where I had contractors promise that they can turn 10 units in a month, no problem. And I give them 10 units and they get 2 to 4 done within that first month. Another 6 flow into the second month. Another 6 or so we flow into the third month. Before you know it, I'm creating so much vacancy loss in that now I have to lower my rents just to hopefully not incur any more vacancy loss to hurry up and get my units leased up. It's a delicate process that you need to blend into your overall underwriting and blend into your overall rehab plan in order to minimize your vacancy loss. But if you execute well and you understand what I'm saying here, this is where then you can hit that forced appreciation. This is where you can hit these numbers that you're underwriting to. And in today's environment place, we have very tight parameters to be able to operate in anyways. So you have to understand how to execute that overall. If you have any more questions on that, I'll open up the floor for questions here later on. I know, again, I just went into quite a bit there, but it's a very important concept, what I just described on how many units you're going to take offline, to what level you're going to upgrade them to, and what's your capacity to be able to execute on a per month basis, if it makes sense to do so. And typically it doesn't. I would focus more on my rehabs in the May, June, July, August timeframes and keeping my occupancy at above 93. In this case, if I only have 2 units or so per month, that's by far easy rehab project to manage overall. And you'll be able to minimize your vacancy loss that way. Now, some cases it may make sense if you're in a really hot market where there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of loss to lease, and you have the rehab machine up and running, meaning you have the right crew in place and you have the logistics nailed down. You know exactly where you're going to source materials and you know where you're going to get the most cost-effective materials. It may make sense to do a rapid rehab. And what I'm going to explain here in the remaining of this discussion is some of the mechanics I use, some of the process I use to hit minimum of 15 units per month while saving 10 to 15% on costs and being ahead of schedule. And I've been able to do that with my system where I'm hitting 15 units per month. I've been able to rehab 45 units in 3 months, get them leased up, all within about a 90-day window. All right, so going back to this, so that is some of the the backdrop of some of the thinking that we need to be applying to as we build out our strategic plan. And once we have those units identified, then we got to talk about how we're going to then get them rehabbed. We would pick the units that we're going to renew, see what the responses are. Then we would pick the units that we're actually going to non-renew or maybe we want to rehab because there's so much in-place loss to lease. It makes sense from an ROI standpoint to infuse capital to improve those units and get the maximum return on your investment. When we do that, we got to make sure first we walk the units. And one of my properties, every Wednesday, we would set the units we want to walk. We would give 24-hour notice. We go walk all those units. We take an assessment of what is the condition of each of those units. And then we determine our rehab plan on each of those units overall. And the tool that we use for that is this estimate tool, just a simple spreadsheet you can have in a Google Sheet on your phone with the contractor. And we have the line items of every single thing that we would rehab using our standard template for most of our properties. And we identify the cost by simply marking down if we're going to rehab that certain component of the unit overall. And then we would set our individual prices and add those up down below. You can see this broken down between materials and labor. We just have total cost because they grouped it all into one, but you can break it down between materials and labor. And we walk every single unit that we're going to rehab and make a determination if it's smart to then try to renew, or do a lease trade out as is, or do a lease trade out and upgrade to pro forma level. So this is a simple tool that we use for that. Now, once we determine that we're going to non-renew certain units, then we won't issue a renew notice. We say non-renewal, and then we create the estimate. We finalize the estimate. And then when those units are going to non-renew, they're going to show up on the availability report as non-renewals. And we then have a set date, which creates the timeline of when you're going to rehab that unit. And so that set date will show up on the availability report. And one thing for those that work with me knows that I really, really preach about how important it is to understand the availability report, as this is this is the pulse to your property, that you understand how many units are vacant, which ones are noticed to vacate, which ones are on eviction, which ones are vacant leased, which one are noticed to vacate leased, so on and so forth. But as those renewal notices go out, there's going to be a certain capture percentage of, say, 50% of the notice. You want to hit 50% renewals. You're going to put out maybe 75%. You're going to put out 100% renewal notices. About 50% of them are going to renew. You put out 100% renewal notices, about 50% of them renew, and you track who's going to renew and who's not going to renew. And anyone that's not going to renew, then you have to make a determination if you're going to rehab to a premium level or not. And those notices will be tracked on the availability report. And you'll see here that the date they'll move out, when the lease end date is, when the date they will move out. In this case, they're going to live in there for one extra month. Or if the lease end date is end of March, they're going to move out end of March. And then you can determine, based upon the scope that you identified through this sheet here, you determine how long it's going to take to rehab that unit. And you put that date available right here. And also based upon if you're going to go as is, make ready, or a premium rent, then you can determine what the market rent is going to be based upon the level of upgrade you're going to do with that unit. That is tracked right here. And then now the timeline is set in place. You know when the tenant's going to move out. You know how long it's going to take to rehab. Therefore, you know exactly when you're going to start the rehab for that project. I have another sheet. I'll show you how to manage and track the entire set of rehabs that we're doing. Now, I want to talk about material orders. Now you know exactly when the rehab is going to start. So important to understand the lead times for all your material orders. During COVID, for example, I remember in 22, it was 4 months to get, in some cases, doors and windows, 3 months for countertops, other pieces of tile, maybe 2 months. And that created a huge problem in trying to get our rehabs done in a timely manner. Those times have definitely come in, and there's more people working, but there still may be bottlenecks Those in doing large development, getting electrical boxes, those are on back order for long periods of time, 6, 9, 12, 18 months to get electrical boxes in some cases, bricks in some areas, concrete in some areas. You have all these bottleneck issues in getting supplies to your property. The only way you're going to know is to get in the middle of it and understand where you're going to source these materials and how long it's going to take for those materials to get there. And from a high level, best way to manage materials to do bulk ordering. If you have a high level understanding of what your overall cost is going to be, you can do a sample set of rehabs as a test, understand what the scope's going to be, and then do mass order so you don't have that issue. That how to manage that is a different discussion. The key here is to make sure you understand what the lead times are so that you don't ever have a unit not being rehab because of material back order. That is something you should be able to manage if you get ahead of it and make sure materials show up on time. The second is labor. Your construction team needs to know when they have access to a unit. Again, we have another tool to manage that so they know exactly when they have access to a unit. And they should start that rehab the same day that tenant, as soon as that tenant moves out, immediately start trash out, boom, right into the overall process on rehab on that unit. And that way you can minimize your vacancy loss because you're max performing the construction timeline and you're making sure people stay accountable to the dates that they say they're going to turn that unit and make it available. Within this, you may have various vendors. You may have a flooring vendor, countertop vendor. You may have someone that sprays the tubs. You got to make sure each of the vendors abide by the timeline, and you can further break down the timeline within each unit using individual timelines and having some overlap built in and keeping those crew members apprised of when they have access to the units. Some ways to do that is when spray tub people come in, they want to do 3 to 4 units at a time. Just tell them the time frame when all those 3 or 4 units are going to be available. They come in, knock it out. Painters come in, knock it out. Flooring come in, knock it out. They like to have these units done in bulk. If you're doing 15 units per month, you're probably going to have about 3 to 5 units per week for them to come in and knock it out to make it worth their time. Again, you got to plan that out so there's overlap on each of those units that come in, knock out all those jobs all at once. They're very efficient that way when they do that overall. But this is where everything is tracked. And then once that unit is updated, you do want to make sure that the description, the unit type reflects that. And then you also want to make sure that market rent reflects the updated description or the updated template so that you're actually getting the additional rent bump that you plan for. A lot of times, it's a tragedy that you go through all this work. One, people are not checking to see when those units are going to be available, and it sits there for like months at a time because you lose track of the process and it's not getting rented, and you just, whatever rent bump you're going to get, you just lost because of 1 month of vacancy loss will kill a business plan. Secondly, they may not correctly update the nomenclature of the unit type. Therefore, the market rent won't get updated and it won't get leased to a renovated market rent rate. And again, you're not going to realize the additional rent bump, and you just wasted time, effort, energy, and money. Attention to detail is so vital and so important in this section so that you have a succinct process where the construction team is in sync with the management team and the trackers reflect the right information. So the management team knows exactly when the construction team is going to deliver a unit, and they know exactly what rent rate is going to be at. And then you need to track everything on the back end in terms of cost, time, and money to make sure you understand where you stand in the process, you get the right ROI in your investment, get the right rent bump that you're trying to achieve or project for, and for you to truly understand where the market is at in that overall process on terms of the rent bump. So this planning section is a lot what I've been talking about here when you're scheduled, when you start the rehab. And then I also talked about execution. Execution is everything in this business. And being able to hit these numbers is so important in the first year And minimizing vacancy loss is so important within the first year. And as you're going through the execution process, this is why boots on the ground is so important in this business. It's hard to influence and create some pressure and incentives for construction to get done in a timely manner if someone's not physically on site overseeing this entire construction process. I'm there when we're scheduling out the units. I'm there when we're doing the estimates. I'm there to check on the units, and I'm there to receive the units to make sure the quality is done correctly. If I'm not there, someone on my team is there. Meaning I'm there, meaning someone from my team is there on site. If you're not co-located, one way to do this is hire a construction manager that they're on site for you. I've done that before, but had a lot of success of having on-site in-place construction manager that reports to me on a daily basis. I'm on the phone with the construction manager every day, but he's actually physically there making sure the work gets done correctly within the constraints, including time and money. And so that's the execution piece. And the last is track. Like I said, you want to make sure that all the information is updated to the availability report as well as your trackers. And you want to make sure that you got the right rent bump that you're looking for. And a tracker that I use is a renovation tracker that you can see the different titles of the things that we're tracking here, the unit number, type, prior rent, renovated rent, if it's occupied or not, so on and so forth, date, vacant, where we are in each of these. This is kind of our scheduling tool as well. It's good to track the individual dollar amounts you spend on each of these categories as well. I have that on the estimate sheet here. So we have the dollar amount for each category for each unit. But this tool is something that you have to hold everyone accountable to on your team. And part of the temptation is that people like to do the work, they don't like to track the work. But to ensure that the rental team stays succinct with the property management team, you've got to have everyone pointing to this and everyone's eyes on a tracking tool so that everyone stays up to date. And what I just do is if it's whatever's on the sheet is what I plan towards, what I abide by. That way, if something's wrong, we can catch it and I'll question it and I'll show that I'm serious, that this is the tool that we're going to use. So use it. And if you don't use it, then I'm going to hold you accountable to whatever's on this tool anyways. So you track the dates, you track the cost, you track the ROI. And again, you hold everyone accountable. And based upon what is going on with your overall rehab, then you can pivot as needed. A lot of cases I found that doing a rehab didn't make sense. The time that it was sitting off market, the amount of money it costs, simply minimizing my vacancy loss and burning off my loss to lease was a lot better business model than trying to go through this forced appreciation model, thinking you're actually going to appreciate it in a quick manner. Other times I found that maybe a little different template. I didn't have to do granite countertops, tile backsplash. Maybe I didn't have to update the appliances, had to do flooring and paint and fixtures, and I still got the premium rent bump. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. I'm going to also do A/B testing to really finalize what the correct template is. Then I can perform to scale as I continue to finish off the renovation schedule and model overall on my interior unit renovation plan. And so again, this is the roadmap. What I explained was everything kind of broken down within each individual silo you see here. And you can break it down even further. I won't go into any more details on that. And then I showed you some of the tools and the thinking that I use behind if I'm going to renovate a unit or not. I have a renovation tracker here. I have the per unit cost estimate available there. I have also a high level budget that I would use to kind of track overall cost for each of the units so that this is kind of clumped in one, but you can have each unit number there and you can determine the individual costs and then break it down even further, tying that back into this estimator to see how much you spent on each unit. Another tool that is a really good tool to use is called HappyCo. HappyCo is an app, it's online software. You can take pictures, you can track individual unit whatever is inside of each individual unit is inside HappyCo. That is a really good tool to use and something that becomes very needed when, especially when you go to exit and sell the property. You know the overall condition of each unit, especially if it has brand new washer dryer hookups, brand new appliances, and if it has been updated or not overall. All right. Like I said, I'll have time to ask for you to ask some questions here at the end in a minute. Kind of winding down here and wrapping things up. We also just want to make sure we understand capacity of the team overall. When we're talking about ready units versus not ready units, what is the overall capacity? It's this term called execution risk. And if there's a full renovation required, or there's going to be a lot of risk involved, and you have to assess this and make sure you blend this into your underwriting model. I like how a lot of people who do not have renovation experience or not been doing this for a while think somehow this property go through all these steps and mechanisms and magically these numbers show up overnight. It doesn't work like that. You really got to assess. We have to do a full interior, exterior renovation. We have to add all these amenities. We're going to rehab the office. We have a demographic profile we need to overturn. We have a troubling, maybe some bad tenants. We have some delinquency we need to overcome, some accounts receivable issues. We have maybe some payable issues if you had the property for a little bit. You have a limited scope, or you have a limited CapEx funds available. You got to go to the lender to get access to your CapEx funds. You got a brand new management team. Like all these factors creates individual risks that adds complexity to your plan overall. And that's why when you buy older assets, you want that risk-adjusted premium, you want that risk-adjusted return so that it makes it worth your time, effort, energy, and risk to go through something like that. And you need to be able to understand your team, rental team capacity, capability. How much can they handle? Have you worked with this team before? Do you have experience working with this team? Can you validate what they tell you that they can actually deliver upon? And keep in mind that interests have to be aligned. A lot of times contractors will say one thing that will favor their interests, but maybe not yours, just so that they can have work or make sure they're getting paid. You got to kind of understand that. And if you don't, again, you're subjecting yourself to risk. And say you do have the Rockstar rental team, then you got to understand their capability and their capacity. For me, I have developed my own vertically integrated construction team. It's definitely been a game changer for me, where I know the capacity. I've done many projects with this one team. I can control the costs. We have a system down to procure all of our materials. And I know what they can do from an execution standpoint. And I can bolt on and tack on more crew members under the same management to be able to increase my capacity and my throughput overall. But all of these things, if you can't deliver upon, then you're going to subject yourself to exposure. And again, vacancy loss is some of the biggest ways you can create exposure and kill a business plan overall. A lot of moving parts, and there's complexity in the real estate business. I'm not going to sugarcoat it with you guys yet. It doesn't have to be something you try to have to figure out, or it doesn't have to be something that you're going to just see in how it goes. You can actually have a predetermined process put in place with some analytics done ahead of time using some of the things that I shared with you, and having a succinct plan before you push play going into a deal. Here's the challenge. When you're in acquisition phase, you're focused on so many things, trying to get those loan docs right, trying to get your insurance, trying to get your money raised, trying to get your business plan put together, trying to do your webinars, a lot of things that goes on. But you also have to put in your business, your rehab plan. You got to create it. You cannot waste any time as soon as you close. And I know what it's like when you finally close. You feel like you want to take a step back, take a breather, sit down, but you cannot, because time is money in this business, and it's an everyday business. Got to find time to squeeze in to create that business plan up front. But you're going to thank yourself, because if you can do a business plan during that crazy time, that 60, 90 days of under acquisition period, it gets a lot easier after that. And now you have a plan to kind of deviate from and pivot from as needed. And you got some of the big rocks out of the way. That way you can start executing the plan as you start owning and holding the property. This here is just talking about how you having a property that maybe you've held on for a while, you can using some proactive numbers, looking into the future to determine how much rehab you're going to have to do to a property, or how much exposure you're going to have to determine how much potential rehab you're going to do to a property. A lot of properties had delinquency issues post-COVID because all the COVID money ran out. Property management companies were relying on the COVID money. They kind of got used to it. COVID money ran out. Tenants got used to it, and then they had to go out and actually start paying rent. And they didn't. They got behind, and all this delinquency built up. We saw there's a lot of exposure coming up. We did our best to get ahead of it, but a lot of times you didn't. But once you have that exposure, understanding delinquency, then we go out and pre-order, get crews in place, pre-order materials, get our construction team in place. And for me, I took on the make readies through my third parties, allowed the maintenance team to focus on other items and work orders. I was able to then push a lot of units through the system and process to get ahead of that. And as a result, my economic occupancy, my NOI, started to increase. This tactical roadmap, this rapid rehab roadmap is vital. It's so important. And you got to have foresight in this business. And you got to be able to use that foresight so you're not reactive, you're proactive in order to stay ahead of the plan overall. Okay, and a lot of these tools I've already discussed. I'm going to wrap up here and talk about keys to success. Walk the units. Have you have your thumb constantly on the pulse. Walk before, during, after. Have a presence. Don't micromanage though. If you have the right team, the right system and process, your job is more about what you need to do to help them do their job versus doing their job for them. The minute you start taking over, you're going to be involved in the wrong things. You'll be so buried in the minutia, you're going to miss the bigger picture and probably going to get behind in your project. Don't want that to happen. But just being involved and being in the middle of the process, staying on top of things helps the project move overall. Create an incentive to beat budget and timeline. Yeah, if you could beat the budget, you get a certain percentage of the savings or timeline. You can also get a certain bonus with that. I have a contractor on the call, every KPI call once a week. Even though I met with them offline, met with them during the week, I want them on the call. That way, everyone there on the call, which is a working meeting, can talk through any constraints, talk through the expectations, talk through deliveries. So you have a constant two-way street of communication. You don't have any breaks in communication. I've seen this happen. We have a lot of breaks in communication. People don't know exactly what's going on. People start making assumptions and making decisions out of the box without all the information, and things get messed up as a result. Keep your trackers up to date. All of these trackers, the rental tracker is so important. Keep that up to date and make sure the availability report is up to date as well with that. And then track that renovated rent, making sure you get the ROI. If you don't get the ROI, which you originally projected using this tool here, if you don't get that ROI, then you need to ask, is it worth even doing the renovation, or how can we improve the ROI by minimizing the vacancy loss, adjusting the template a little bit to get a little bit more rent premium while you take an assessment of what's going on in the market from a macro level overall as well. All right, that was a lot. I know I rushed through that, but this here is so vital to this business to understand this process, and something that I have developed over a number of years now, being in this space, owning over 3,000 doors and going full cycle on 15 out of 19 properties, and being pretty much in the middle, in the trenches, in the ditches the entire time, and understanding what makes these deals work. This business is about execution. It's about execution. It's not just about underwriting. It's not just about finding the right deal. You got to make these deals work. You got to have systems and processes. You got to have the right people in place. You got to know your price. You got to understand your product. And once you do all of that, you can execute well. You can make a lot of money in this business. You can change lives in this business. You can live life of financial freedom. You can have all those things that we talk about that this business has available to you, but you got to do it. You got to do it, and you got to have your plan in place. So with that, I want to open the floor to any questions you may have. Appreciate you guys hanging on if you're still here. And I'm going to hop over to the various channels to see if you have any questions. And we'll just hang out for a minute and give you an opportunity to ask some questions. And Govind, if you see that there's any questions out there that I'm missing, just let me know and I'll just point me
Sure.
to where that's at and I'll answer those questions for you guys. So let's take a look here. Me from OKC, I see you there. Awesome. Let's go to my personal Facebook. Good stuff. Good. Awesome. Thanks for the comments, Mr. Garina and Mohammed. Appreciate that. Thanks for participating there. Let's take a look at Instagram. See if they got any questions, any comments overall. Not seeing anything there. And last, let's take a look at LinkedIn. What do we got going on at LinkedIn today? All right. Nothing there. Okay. All right. Well, if you have anything that comes up, any questions that comes up later on, maybe you'll be going through something with your particular properties, underwriting a deal even. A lot of what I shared with you plays into your underwriting model. If you can understand this execution piece as the foundation, as the operational side, that will help you have a more realistic expectation when you underwrite deals and know how to underwrite them. And I like to look at it from a very in-depth level and understanding that rent roll. And if you unpack that rent roll, like I shared with you, it'll give you, again, a more realistic model to underwrite to so that you can truly determine the potential cash flows you have, particularly in your years 1 and 2 of holding. So awesome. That is all I have for today. Appreciate you guys hanging on, paying attention. And I will see you next time, Monday, 12 o'clock Central. I'm here every Monday to share with you any insights there are to holding and operating apartment complexes.